the sort of the kickstart of our panel event. Dave, if you're are still there and would like to come in and join us, it would be great to have you and actually get your feedback on this. Obviously, just checking if Dave is coming online. So just give us a second. Here he is. Hey, Dave.
Hi.
Thanks very much for coming back and joining us for this panel discussion. Great to have you. And we actually had a quick question at the end from one of the audience, which I would like to get your thoughts on. And it's the idea that how about having quality assuring every step of our sort of process, our delivery life cycle? Should there be no separate QA function?
I mean, I think that's, I mean, as a general principle, universals are a bad idea. So if you look at KPIs, for example, we've got a huge body of evidence. In fact, there is no evidence to contradict this, that when people are working for explicit goals, it destroys intrinsic motivation. So, you know, outcome-based KPIs are actually going to damage your organization. I mean, that's where we look, for example, on vector measures. Yeah. If you put a separate QA process on every single process, you're going to end up with a massive backlog. Yeah. In terms of the way it works. I mean, the whole concept of, you know, alpha testing or perpetual alpha, all right, means that you are prepared to test things with users, provided users understand the risk and you've got feedback loops in place. So I don't think it's a simple, you know, there is one way of doing it, all right? I think you need to be aware of the context.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I actually got another question, and please, to the audience, if there's any questions for the panel discussion for Omar and Dave, please do come in on Slido and add some points of discussion in there for us. But a great one came up in a conversation in a particular meetup last night, and I wrote it down actually, thinking of this panel discussion today and really wanting to get both your insights on this. If Agile is analogous to human development, then at 20 years old, it's only really reaching adulthood. Most people have now heard of it and have dabbled in it, shall we say. But the question that was asked last night, will it take another 20 years for it to become the norm and to really start to be a driver in more traditional businesses? So that's open to Omar or Dave to please come in on that one.
Okay, I'll go first. I mean, Agile is actually reaching the end of its life cycle at the moment. It's kind of like, I mean, to be quite honest, there's the big Agile celebration next year, which I'm involved in. And I've been arguing very strongly we should organise it as a wake, right, which is an Irish funeral, which is actually a celebration of a life well lived and a move on to the next generation. It takes 3 days and involves a lot of alcohol. Yeah. So the commodity, and the minute SAFe came out, you knew Agile was over. Because SAFe is a classic high-level commodification, overstructured, non-agile approach. It's designed. My most tweeted comment lately is when I used a T.S. Eliot quote on social media a few days ago, which has gone viral. Just have a look and see it, all right?
I've seen it and liked it.
So I think the issue now is what comes out. I mean, business ideas have a cycle time of 2 or 3 years if they're single origin, 10, 15 years if they're multi-origin. So KM was multi-origin, Agile was multi-origin, it had XP, it had DSDM, it had Scrum in it. So multi-origin things tend to be more resilient and survive for longer, but they get commodified. And design thinking is also in a similar stage. I mean, there's no point in going down a design thinking route. It's kind of like, double diamond, linear process, highly codified, highly structured training course. Any design professor I know looks on with horror and says, would you please stop using the word? Yeah. So I think, it's coming to an end, guys, all right? So what comes out of it is key, all right? And by the way, it's not Agile 2, which is one of the most ridiculous initiatives I've seen in my life.
Don't worry, that came up in conversation last night as well.
Radically nonsensical, right? I actually think one of the things we need to start looking at is how do we make IT a profession, because it isn't. It's very young.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the professional standards of, say, the accountancy firms or lawyers. It grants certification based on turning up on a 2-day course and filling out a multi-choice questionnaire in your own time and paying somebody every year to read a slide set, all right? That's not professionalism. Yeah? Professional certification is based on a mixture of theory and practice and takes 4 or 5 years to obtain. And I think we have got to make IT into a profession. At the moment, it's a bunch of amateurs. Not only is it a bunch of amateurs, it's a bunch of amateurs who think they can tackle anything. There's a famous character in a British comedy called Boys from the Black Stuff called Yossi Yates, who basically his constant theme is, give us a job, I can do that, regardless of whether he's competent or not. So the idea that Agile or Scrum can come across into corporate strategy, I find frankly risible. But it's, oh, we're Agile, so we can do anything. And it's just nonsense.
Brilliant. Thank you, as ever, thanks for that. Omar, do you have any insight to share on that piece? Especially, where do you think it's going to be within the next 5, 10, 20 years as well? Is it a case of Agile's dead, long live Agile? No Agile 2.0s, as Dave rightly mentioned.
I think Dave is. I completely agree with Dave on the Agile front. I think it came to the level of maturity where everyone acknowledged the value of Agile, but also the limitation of the Agile practice, and everyone understand that we need something else. Safe is something that organization leverage, but I think Dave hinted it's the opposite of Agile to some degree, and therefore the distributed Agile, Scrum, the Spotify model also takes some bandwidth with Agile at scale implementation these days. And I think we will find the balance. We still don't have the practice in place, but and I don't know what will be the practice name. I don't think it exists right now, but it will take us time as an industry to get matured with the enterprise Agile practice. We need to, and we talked about it about 10 minutes ago, we need to continuously evolve, that's for sure. We need to continuously make sure that we have the right KPIs and metrics in place, and if it doesn't work for us, find the next few metrics that will. And when Forrester, for example, is talking about value stream management, this is, I think, what they're aiming for. Other thought leaders are promoting such ideas, just to make sure again that eventually we don't forget that what we need to do in order to win versus the competitors is to deliver business value faster than our competitors. I think this is where we'll find the maturity, and it will take time, but we'll get there.
Just to throw something in, I mean, I think we also need to realize the context has shifted with COVID and with global warming and with things like Black Lives Matter. Actually, I mean, this is a slight disagreement, maybe not. I don't think it's just about providing more value than competitors. I think we're doing work at the moment with some companies on how the hell do they retain employees, because employees don't want to work for them because they're evil. So the war for talent is no longer just a straight free market neoliberal capitalist model. It's much more complex than that. So I think that interaction is going to be key. And I think the boundaries between companies and industry and governments and communities are breaking down continuously at the moment, and we should be part of that. I think the fundamental problem at the moment, which the whole of the software industry has got, is it's stuck itself in a manufacturing mindset. And I don't normally use the word mindset, but this time it is set, right? It thinks it's there to produce things, yeah, and it's measured on the production, yeah. We need to switch from that manufacturing mindset, which comes with things like Kanban and Scrum. All of these techniques follow from that, right? we need to think about, we're managing a complex ecosystem. And in an ecosystem, the architecture around which things interact matters more than the things. And nobody is really looking at architecture at the moment. That's the big missing gap in Agile.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thanks, Dave. I was also very happy to see your reference to T.S. Eliot. I was born and raised in the same village that he was born, raised, and died as well. So he's very part of my upbringing as well. So that was great to see. Thanks for sharing. We've actually got some questions that have come in for the panel, and I'm just going to head over to Slido now to share them. So lean practice is endemic in new manufacturing and is focused on agility. Surely evolution of the method will lead in alternatives to Agile and Kanban. And that's from Raymond. Perhaps Omer, you would like to lead on this one.
I think we just discussed that. I think that, and Dave just like predicted the question. I think that we are too much manufacturer oriented. So the thoughts that we need to be much more structured and software should be built somewhat like a car or a building, I think it's a mistake. Yes, we should take some principle, lean principle, you know, the Toyota lean thinking and so forth, into the development process, but we should not copy and paste. It should not be a replication, and we should treat software as software. Just to your previous point, Dave, I hope that it will just make us better person and better companies if employees will demand more from the companies they work for, regardless of the methodology and so forth. You mentioned Black Lives Matters and the climate change. I hope you're right.
Yeah, just throw something else in on here, and I need to be sympathetic to the Toyota way, because they've just produced a video which has me and Galileo as two of the originators of it. So I need to be careful. If you've been praised, you shouldn't be too ungrateful, all right? I think the key thing to understand about the Toyota way is it's about flow. And the flow metaphor, I'm going to be blogging a lot about this over the next couple of weeks. The flow metaphor is quite important because flows are channeled, yeah? And flows can be turbulent, and you can have salt mud. The flow metaphor is a very powerful one, yeah, because it's about movement. I think the key thing is it's the issue on scaling. You don't scale a complex system by imitation or reproduction. No. It's why anybody in Spotify will tell you there isn't a Spotify model. There's the current version of a journey they're traveling on, right? And yes. I don't know what it is with McKinsey. So I think they came late to Agile, so they only picked up people who wouldn't work for anybody else, and you can see it in their publications, right? And they're just trying to use Spotify as a, oh my God, we've got to carry on selling here, right? That's a problem. I think if you take a complex systems approach, you scale by decomposition and recombination. So that to me is the future. So we take methods, all right? And Scrum is a method. It is not a framework. This is a misuse of the language to call it framework. It's a collection of methods, right? You take Scrum and you break the methods down to the lowest point of coherence. So, for example, a sprint is 1 point, which is the lowest point of coherence. Yeah. You say, what happens if we vary that? So instead of 2 weeks, we make it 3 months. What happens if we add to that something from DSDM, which is a time box, yeah, which basically says you've got a minimum and maximum, you know, minimal viable product range, and you've got a minimum and maximum resource that you can use. And you always have to deliver on this date. You can't not deliver on that date, but you vary the delivery or you vary the thing. But what I'm doing is I'm taking methods, breaking them down and recombining them. Yeah? Now, I think the skill of an architect is that ability to recombine in context. And the problem with Agile is you're either Scrum or you're Kanban. Well, there's a famous statement from Tolkien, doubtless to sheep, other sheep appear different or the shepherds. Yeah, I've been a CEO executive most of my life. There is no bloody difference between Kanban and Scrum. They just all have these things on Post-it notes and they move them through a flow. But for some reason, they think they're really different, all right? Yeah, and it's kind of like set the sheepdogs on them, or preferably the wolves, all right? So I think we need to take a multi-methods approach, and that means defining how methods from different suppliers interact with each other And this is what we call entanglement around points of coherence. I mean, we've done 3 years of work now on different types of scaffolding. You define the type of scaffolding, you define the interactions, you let things interact around them. And if I go back to, I mean, sorry, this is a personal boat bit, right? I was one of the 3 guys who set up the SDM when it started, yeah? And we did it over a meal in a pub in Cheltenham. I mean, no ski resorts, we were British, so one meal in a pub was enough, right? And the key thing is, it was 3 competitors came together to create an independent standards body. Yeah, we actually didn't say one company will create a proprietary method. And I think that's the other thing. We need people from different backgrounds working together to create things which actually can be used in common. And that's the only way Agile will scale.
I love the fact that your trio has come full circle there as well, Dave, especially with the 3 of you in that pub in Cheltenham. It'd be great to find out which pub it was, knowing the area well. There's one here, and I want to throw in the sort of
coming from Swindon.
Okay. Oh, I used to live in Swindon, so that's why I know the area well.
My deepest sympathies. Right?
Okay, well, I'm going to throw in the challenging question now. Someone who remains anonymous shares, and it's a personal view, I'm personally at odds with the idea that architecture should be leading consideration from the customer viewpoint. Discuss.
I mean, it's okay if you be wrong. I don't have a particular problem with that, right? Lots of people are wrong, like creationists and other people. Basic fact, I mean, remember architecture, let's take the scaffolding concept in architecture, which is key. You can have endo or exoskeletons. So if you know what you've got to build, you can throw some steel scaffolding and you can use it to support what you're doing. If you're less sure about that, you create some sort of internal skeletal structure and allow things to emerge so things can grow and develop. Yeah. So given that in these days, users don't know what to ask for, because the capability of technology is evolving faster than user requirements can be formed, we need to start to think about some radically different ways of reusing existing technology to match unarticulated needs. Now, to do that, you have to have an architecture which allows things to interact and be swapped in and out very quickly. So if you don't get that right, everything else fails.
I think it's the way you refer to the word architecture. Okay, it seems so. From my perspective, in Micro Focus, for example, we don't have a product owner; we have a functional architect. And the reason why we have a functional architect is because we want to make sure that the engineering team actually understands what are they building, and they build it in a way that can be changed tomorrow, or at least slightly, without rebuilding the product or the service. Okay, so on the value or the business definition front, this is one thing. I think also that on the technical side, in 2020 going into 2021, we have achieved drastic improvements that allows us to build the software in a way that or architecturally speaking, in the right way. So microservices, Docker and Kubernetes, all those types of capabilities that, it's in our bag now, allows us to build the software right from an architecture perspective, and also define the software right from an architecture perspective. I think this helps Agile, not hurts Agile.
Great. Dave, thanks very much for sharing your viewpoints on that, and thanks Anonymous for sharing that with us. Okay, we've got the next one. We've got one from Christopher. Based on the comment about not needing QA earlier, what are your thoughts on how developers tend to not have the testing background required to effectively test apps?
Okay.
Can you please repeat the question? Sorry.
Certainly. So based on the earlier comment about not needing QA, the person who sort of suggested that, what are your thoughts on how developers tend to not have the testing background required to effectively test apps?
I think it's a cultural thing. It's what is a testing background or quality background? It's about ownership and accountability. If a developer will hold accountable for delivering high quality software, it will happen. Okay, they might say, hey, I need the relevant training and enablement, I need the right tools in place and so forth, but it will happen. I don't believe that there is a person that knows just how to develop and another person that knows how to test. That's not a reality. So the organization as a whole need to have the right practice in place to deliver high quality software. That's it. And with the right process, practice, and tools, this can be achieved in various ways. A dedicated QA team, or even a dedicated quality center of excellence, or one Scrum team that has all the capabilities within them, more manual or more automated, it doesn't matter. In a highly regulated environment, or a web application out there that needs no regulation, it can happen and it should happen. High quality delivery is a must.
I think there's things you can do which make sense. One is, I don't think we include professional end system testers early enough in the design process. Mm-hmm. I would bring testers in right at the early stage design, because you can do things at early stage design which make testing easier. It's just a matter of somebody thinking about it, right?
100%.
And people won't naturally do that. They get into this linear, that's somebody else's problem. And by the way, Scrum encourages this. Kind of like, yes, I've got my input, exactly, I've got my output. The other thing is a problem, right? So, and that's one of the ways we use trios. For example, putting an end system tester together with a user trained to talk to IT people, together with a young prototyper, and throw 5 or 6 of those at the problem and see what they come up with and pick the best and then put it into Scrum. That's a pre-Scrum technique, right? I think the second thing is practice matters. I mean, I have arguments about this with people in Agile. As far as I'm concerned, if you write code once and if you don't and say you'll refactor it later, I will fire you. And I have fired people because nobody ever refactors, right? They just don't. And you end up with bloody spaghetti, right? So yeah, if you've got a function which is going to be used 100 times, you get that right, you quality control it, if you put it under version control, and that's it. Now, I remember when I set up one of the first object libraries, we had a nightmare, right? This is a micro focus story, by the way, as well. So we set up a massive object library, right? And, you know, our problem was people would get source code. So we had 2 groups of people. One were a bunch of people writing payroll systems in micro focus COBOL, which I still like as a software product. It was a great product, right? And they understood objects, so they actually, for example, bought list objects off the internet and just reused them. Our super coders couldn't cope. All the software is bad. They could always write a better version. So a list object, they'd rewrite it 18 times, and we'd have 18 different versions in different code.
Wow.
Yeah, and so what we ended, and the micro focus guys got it straight away, right? What we ended up doing is banning access to source code. Yeah, literally, because it was the only way of stopping them doing that. And I think there are some ridiculous lack of discipline in the software industry which perpetuates, which is hidden under names like refactoring, which actually make testing more difficult. And there's a discipline aspect on that.
Agreed.
That's a pet peeve, right? It's like idiots who don't use styles on word processing documents. I would personally take them out and have them garroted. Because I'm the poor bastard who has to integrate stuff from lots of people, putting carriage returns in and changing fonts. And they don't realize if they just get the style structure right, I can integrate things quickly and things will work better. And it's that early stage discipline that we're not teaching people.
Perhaps we can arrange a public garroting somehow tied into the celebration of 20 years next year. It sounds like it could be quite fun. Look,
by the way, this is why we're preaching the use of BDD, behavior-driven development, within our tools and with our customers. One of the biggest benefits is the standardization of the tests. So at least everyone talks in the same language, the Gherkin format or whatever format you choose. But let's say Gherkin, I don't need to rewrite the same test over and over again. If I want to turn a manual test into automation, it's easy now. If I need to talk to my business analyst, he understands now the language that I'm using. It's the same format, which data, and so on. So the commonality or the alignment between the different stakeholders is critical.
Here's my point about abstraction and codification in the keynote. You need to get to a level of common abstraction and common codification for diffusion. If you don't, you've just got a collection of craftsmen. And sometimes you want the craftsmen, but sometimes you need the map users, right? So if somebody produces, everybody produces their own map with their own symbols on it, nobody's going to be able to use the thing.
Yep.
Exactly.
No, brilliant. Thank you. All right, next one up, we've got from Mike, and he says, in my experience at many clients, Agile works great in every area other than performance testing. How do you see performance testing integrated into Agile?
Dave, do you want to take it, or do you want me to start with it?
I'll give you a metaphor on this. So I was working with Telstra in Brisbane, and they have waterfall projects. Yeah, nothing wrong with waterfall projects for large infrastructure stuff, yeah, but
Nope.
nobody got promoted unless they were Agile. So they ran 1 year sprints, which I thought was quite clever of them, right? And what you're talking about here is a highly structured linear process that you need to get right, and you don't want it to be bloody Agile, thank you very much. Yeah, you want it to be disciplined. And again, this Agile must be everything, right? It's a cult. Yeah, there ain't anything wrong with high levels of structure and high levels of control where you can achieve it. It's a good thing.
Yep.
I agree, and I'm a great advocate of looking at the value that you're trying to get. In the performance testing area, I think that the more you shift left, the better. Okay, if you can find the performance bottleneck earlier, it will take you less time and effort in order to solve the problem. But it doesn't mean that you're agile or not agile. Okay, do your whatever is needed in order to get your performance testing environment and test run sooner, integrate with your continuous testing environment and so forth. It doesn't mean that you have to do this in the same sprint and meet the same KPIs, exactly like Dave said. You can have a 1 year sprint, right? Just focus on what you're trying to achieve rather than trying to get into a specific template or whatever your manager thinks is agile.
This is a general problem beyond software as well. It's kind of like the desire for a universal solution. So we saw it with things like, so business process re-engineering came along, and that solved a whole bunch of problems we didn't have before, but then people took it too far. Now there's two reactions to that. One is to say, okay, it's useful here, we won't use it there. The other is to break the nonsense of Six Sigma. Let's just do it harder and it might work. Then when that doesn't work, you combine it with Lean. Now Lean was designed to eliminate the waste that techniques like Six Sigma created in the first place. So why you combine them, I don't know, right? So people, right. And Scrum was the same. Yeah, everybody wants to have one solution which works everywhere. Now the whole purpose of the Cynefin framework, and this is one of the drivers for it, because I got really fed up with this as a business manager. Every 3 years, I've got to throw everything out and start again. Yeah, rather than just stop using things where they're inappropriate. Yeah, different contexts require different solutions, and you've got to learn to work them together, and you've got to stop this evangelical. Yeah, I blame Billy Graham for most things to do with American management education, because he wants everybody to go through a conversion suite, come to the mercy seat, and go behind stage and be indoctrinated. Right? It's kind of like we need diversity in the system, not conformity.
Brilliant, thanks, and hope, Mike, that answers your question. The next one, we've got another anonymous question. CD manufacturing, in brackets, is not agile. It's high process, pervasively automated and event-driven. Only our thinking is agile enough. So must we focus on thinking?
Do you want to go first, or will I summon a suitable level of sarcasm for the response?
Same here. I think let me try and rephrase what I was trying to say. I think that we should be agile driven in the way we understand the market problems and our customers' needs. Okay, because we live in an ultra dynamic world. I think this is the key where we should focus our agile efforts. If you understand the market problems and the user persona that you're after, then build whatever practice you want in order to solve that. Use whatever architecture. I think this is what's important, whether you call it this way or the other.
Some of this is the cybernetics nonsense, the belief that the nature of a system is determined by perception, and kind of like the general response to that is reality exists, learn to live with it, right? Some things are entangled. I mean, and the key thing is process drives attitude. Attitude doesn't change process. So you need to build systems. Yeah, the attitude will follow from that. And this is a quasi-cult type concept that if we just get everybody to believe the right thing, magically everything will change, and that's not the way it works, guys. You know?
Great. All right, thanks. We're on to our next question from Paul. Customer and architect views are not alternatives. We model customers' requirements. We model architecture. Both and other views are required. So I wonder if it's just more of a statement than necessarily a question for us. But if there's any points anyone wants to raise, please share.
Yeah, I think that's completely misunderstanding things. It's making things into dichotomies. Yeah, the reality is architecture is an enabling constraint. If your users understand architectural constraints, they can probably come up with requirements they wouldn't otherwise come up, and they can get benefits faster. It's a co-evolutionary process, right? It's not just random. It's not an either or. It's a both and, right? In terms of the way it works. If you have a more fluid architecture, you can get more requirements out of it, yeah, and so on. So we need to start to understand that human systems don't work without constraints. And I'm not using constraints in the gold rat sense of the word here. In gold rat, constraints are things to remove, yeah? In evolutionary biology, without constraints, evolution doesn't happen. Yeah, you just get randomness, right? So the issue is you need to create architecture, and architectures can be governing or enabling constraints. So if you've got stable requirements, you can govern. If you've got unstable requirements, you need to enable. But you need a constraint structure, and I think architecture these days needs to be business as well as technology. That needs to break the linearity. I famously said at Corba committees back in the 90s, people are objects too. If you look at people and you look at identities, they're polymorphic, they have inheritance, they have input-output, and technology can interact with those, right? So I think we need to get much more sophisticated about this.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks. Thanks for sharing. Omar, have you got anything else to add on that one, or shall I move on to the next one?
I would just emphasize the user's approach, maybe quoting Henry Ford again. If I would have asked them, they would have said faster horses. We need to understand that vision is something that we need to drive, okay? It's very, very important to meet our customers every day, talk about their needs and so forth, but we need to provide the solutions. In many cases, they don't fully know what they need, and then tie it to the architecture pieces that Dave was talking about.
Okay, brilliant. Love the quote, by the way. One I've just noted down, so that's one to use at a later date. All right, next question from Anon. What are your thoughts on transitioning all QA to quality engineer?
Again, what's the need? Okay, if you want to put it in your CV, by all means do it. Okay, but not all projects need to be transitioned from waterfall to agile and DevOps. Not all products and services need to be architected in the same way. I would say that if you need to go more agile in your application delivery style because of the business needs, if you won't do the shift with QA, QA will become a bottleneck, and you will not accelerate your delivery, and you will actually get lower quality. So you will not earn anything by just by doing that. So if you do need it, you have to do this agile transformation to your QA organization, otherwise you'll fail. And that's by the way a hard thing to do. I've participated in a lot of those sessions and transformations. Many of them, at least at the beginning, failed.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks. Dave, anything else to add on the QA to quality engineer thought?
No, I kind of agree with that. I mean, the only thing I'd add to it, which is not really answering the question, but it might be useful, is that we know that cognitive activation and habits are key to things like safety and quality. So, for example, some of the work we do in safety is to get people to change clothes before they go onto a job, because that changes the cognitive activation pattern of their brain and their bodies, so they actually behave differently. So I think, you know, the concept of ritual transition, so when, for example, you go from coding to testing, there's a really strong argument to actually change your clothes, not change the people. I mean, I've been trying to say this to DevOps. You've got the principle that somebody should take responsibility for the whole thing. But people scan about 3 to 4% of what's available and do a first fit pattern to make decisions. So when you're doing QA, you need to be activating different patterns from when you're coding. And in cognitive terms for humans, ritual can do that. So I'd be quite interested if anyone wants to do this. I think you could make a huge improvement if every time people went from coding to QA testing, they literally went out of the office, changed their clothes, and came back in again. And if it was always the same thing, I think you would see a difference, because we're seeing that in safety. Yeah, ritual is really important for humans.
Well, I think that's great, and I think I'm going to possibly suggest that to some of my teams when I'm back in the office next week, which is great. So thanks for sharing, Dave. We're on to our penultimate question, which says, wiring up microservices as required has little aesthetic appeal and isn't architecture, but may enable business agility.
Yeah, I mean, microservices aren't objects. I mean, I think that's one thing to understand. They're part of the solution, yeah, and the granularity is there. But I'm not sure what the question is about, really, because it just makes sense to wire up microservices and allow things to happen. So just do it, yeah.
And may is the word to highlight. It may drive agility. It may not. It's there's much more to it.
But agility isn't the goal. Agility is the method, for God's sake. I mean, you hear people talking about this. It's like, oh my God, our purpose is to be agile. Well, no, it isn't. All right.
Brilliant. It's my point I raised about half an hour ago. So to have Dave Snowden validate that is truly awesome. It's made my day. Okay, great. Thank you. And we're on to what I think is our last question. I know it's a shorter version on Slido, and I have been sent the sort of the longer version of the question. So it says, in today's world, we are not able to successfully follow requirements traceability and test coverage. And test coverage follows defect management processes. Do you recommend its necessary quality measurement in Agile or DevOps methodology?
That's you, not me, Omer. I mean, strategy and context into this, the deep dive operation stuff.
I can tell you that again, it depends. Okay. Yes, the formal quality practice back then was to make sure that you have as high traceability requirements test traceability as possible. And still today, a lot of the highly regulated industries require that, and it's different. It's just different with Agile and DevOps. It's not big requirements anymore. It's the individual user stories. Our practice says that you don't need to trace tests to the individual task or user story. You need to pick those value-driven work items. It can be epics or whatever you define as business-driven, and you need to make sure that you understand, again, the user flows that are driven by this requirements or epic, doesn't matter how you call it, and test the hell out of those business flows. As long as you do that, you'll probably get a high quality application delivery.
Brilliant. Omar, obviously, thank you very much as ever. Dave, thank you very much as ever. I like the fact that now I'm taking away the idea of trios everywhere. This is an awesome trio, so thank you very much for being part of this awesome one today. And as ever, some great insights from both of you in your talks earlier today. So as ever, thanks very much, and I look forward to having you guys back at a future event with us. So I believe right now we are going to move on to our break, and we're going to have our exhibitors booth viewing as well. So hopefully the links will appear in the chat window shortly, and you can drop over to the Zoom links to go and see what our exhibitors and sponsors are doing. Thank you. The links have just been added into the chat window, so please feel free. And we're going to take a half-hour break now, and we will then be back for our next talk with Drew Sheffman. So I look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks, everyone. And cheers, Omar. Cheers, Dave.